58 is great because there aren't any pending decisions tomorrow. And so the pressure's not on. You don't need to be able to create that amount of income. You need to be able to create how much you need. And the interesting thing about 58 is, we don't quite have access to 401ks or 403bs unless you have an in-service situation. But we also don't know exactly what you are going to spend. The encouragement is start the process of figuring out where you are before you're there. Because the more time you have, the more flexibility you have. All right, so in today's video, we're going to cover the things that you've got to do if you have $750,000 saved and you're only 58. What can you do to retire as soon as possible and as comfortably as possible?
Yep. So I'm 59. So this is
it's
very
too late for Todd, but if you're 58, there's hope for you.
This is very pertinent to me. So yeah, let's talk about some things that if you're my age, if you graduated high school in 1984, born in the mid 60s, this is for you, man.
And this is crunch time too. This is crunch time, but I don't want you to think that it's too late. We've analyzed hundreds, if not thousands, of retirement plans and helped dozens and dozens of people that are around that age, around that asset level, get to and through that retirement gap. So we're going to talk about some of the things to consider. What are the moves that you need to make, as soon as possible, and how do you approach this so that you don't have the ostrich head in the sand thing and we don't miss our opportunity.
But there's a proven framework that will work for these people. So
we're going to share that framework with you. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So Ian, what does having 750,000 in that neighborhood at 58 really mean for retirement? I think a lot of 58-year-olds kind of have it in their mind, but they're still a few years away, which does open up a lot of opportunities.
The answer is it depends. It depends on your goals and how much income you need and what your plan is for retirement.
Sure.
750 could be more than enough. For some of our clients, it is. 750 might not even be scratching the surface for some of our clients. And so the question is, what are your goals? When do you want to retire? What's it going to cost for you to live? And do we have a plan to get there? And so that's a great starting number, but we've got to dig deeper to understand, really what's going to work.
Well, and I think you swerve by it is, what's your lifestyle like? Are you going to sit around the house all the time and never go on vacations and do things? You need a whole lot less money than that. Have you been tied to a desk for 40 years and now you're ready to go and blow and do things? That's going to be expensive. I think an important statistic is, I think this is today, households that are headed by someone 65 or older spend the average of $52,000 per year. That surprised me, I think.
Yeah.
Because I can't do math in my head, but that's more than $3,000 a month.
Yeah.
No, that's more than $4,000 a month easily.
Yeah, it's like 4,200, something like that.
Yeah.
I'm making this up as we go.
Sure.
That's such an interesting stat, and some of the challenge with that is, averages are tough. Because some people it's way less,
sure.
Some people it's way more, and I would venture a guess that most folks that we talk to don't know exactly how much they spend. So these are ballpark numbers, and so you don't need to be able to create that amount of income. You need to be able to create how much you need. And the interesting thing about 58 is, we don't quite have access to 401ks or 403bs unless you have an in-service situation, but we also don't know exactly what you are going to spend. We might have an idea of what you'd like to spend, but what if you get sick? What if the kids need some help? There's a lot that can change, and so we need to have a framework, a decision-making process to be able to evaluate those things.
Yeah, and I think that opens up the area of how much do you need to retire, and I think a lot of people in their late 50s are probably at should be at their highest earning level.
Yes.
How many more years do you have doing that? Is it 2 or is it 10? It probably depends on your job, depends on what you're doing, but how many more years of peak earning do you have?
And this is such a great time to really start this planning too, because when we talk with folks, depending on what they spend and what their situation is, one person might need to work 2 more years, another person might need to work 7 more years, and so the encouragement is start the process of figuring out where you are before you're there. because the more time you have, the more flexibility you have.
Okay.
And at 58 with 750, depending on your earning and what your benefits are at work, depending on how that's set up, it might be the time to accelerate things like Roth, or it might be the time to pull back and do Roth conversions.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge opportunity for people. We've got 5 to 7 years to fill the gap in terms of maximizing tax brackets. This is a great time to do it.
Well, and there's a lot of things that can determine your expenditures. And I would think health would be a major one. If you quit your job and retire and you're not yet 65, you have to pay for health care. If you have a lot of pre-existing conditions, your monthly bill is going to be a chunk.
Yeah.
But if you're healthy, you run and bike ride and have never been sick, you're going to pay a whole lot less than that.
Yeah, health coverage is the biggest challenge for early retirement right now.
Yeah.
And that's, figuring out what that plan is going to be is a huge thing. But this is a great time to catch up on savings.
I was just going to ask you that. What are catch-up contributions?
So depending on the type of plan that you have, what you're covered by, based on your age, you can add a little bit extra to the 401k, and you can do a little bit extra in an IRA. This is a great time to catch up in retirement plans. However, this is also a great time to, if you're in your peak earning years, it's a great time to kind of test your retirement budget. Mm-hmm. For folks who maybe 750 is not going to do it, maybe we need a little bit more. This is the time that you got to really sock it away. And one strategy to do that is figure out what your retirement budget would be and try to live on it for a couple of years now while saving and investing the rest of it. Max the 401k, max the IRA, max the brokerage account, and really chunk into that for a couple of years. What a lot of people find is that, one, they're able to do it and it's not that bad. And two, it helps to increase the amount of time that you'll be able to retire.
That's probably a few $1,000s a month in income the rest of your life by doing that.
Yeah.
That's huge.
One other thing that I would point out here is that, really understanding where you are is critical at this stage. 750 and 58. Like, there's something about, and really it's any age, but if you have an honest assessment of where you are and where you need to be to reach your goals, they tend to be a lot more achievable. And the folks that get depressed and end up working too long and not making great decisions, in our experience, tend to be the ones that don't know where they're at and don't know what they can really afford and how they're going to retire.
Yeah, at 58, you're 4 years from drawing Social Security at the earliest, or you're 12 years from the latest. And that decision, as we've talked about a whole lot of times, can be hundreds of thousands of dollars of difference in retirement for the rest of your life. And so at 58, that's a perfect time to start planning and start thinking about this. Mm-hmm. And I think probably some 58-year-olds are like, I would love to retire, but I can't. Well, you don't know that, okay?
You may be surprised by that.
You may be surprised.
And the other thing that I like about really starting retirement planning around 58, 55 would be even better, if you will, just so you know.
Yeah.
But 58 is great because there aren't any pending decisions tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so the pressure's not on.
That's true.
There's not pressure to make a Social Security decision. There's not pressure to make a Medicare decision. You've got time to really do the work and think through it and evaluate all of your options. And when you have less pressure, you make better decisions typically.
Okay.
So now that you understand your position of 58 and 750, let's talk about how to maximize the remaining wealth building years, no matter what your goals are.
What if people have not been making maximum contributions to their 401k?
This is definitely a time that we need to be considering this.
Let's get after it.
Yeah, let's get after it. And this is a really counterintuitive one. The question is, a lot of folks are starting to have Roth 401ks now. They didn't always. These are relatively new,
Sure.
But a lot of folks are, and they feel like, I'm behind in Roth, so I'm making contributions to my Roth 401k or extra contributions to the Roth IRA. That's not always the right answer. And I would argue in a lot of cases, it's probably almost always the wrong answer.
Wow.
Almost
Okay.
always, not every time. Okay, just hang on.
We are not giving specific financial advice, but
hang with me on this.
Okay.
This strategy, if you can understand, we should do a whole video on this. I mean, if you can understand this, this will be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars for you potentially.
Okay.
Depending on your tax situation, it may make sense to, if you're going to, instead of contributing directly to the Roth, just do a Roth conversion. You're going to get more leverage on those dollars in that situation.
Okay.
Every single time, no matter what your tax bracket is. And so what we're trying to do in the last years leading up to retirement is get as much as we can into investments. Not necessarily 401k, but into investments. And so if you can contribute to a traditional 401k or a traditional IRA, it reduces your taxes and you have a little bit left over, well, then we can invest a little bit more into something else. And so depending on your situation, that may actually give you an extra couple $100 a month to invest somewhere else that's really going to add up and buy you more time.
Well, and just to encourage people to do this, every month of delay can literally be thousands of dollars of annual salary the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And so if you need any encouragement to hurry up and pick up the phone and call us and let's go through this, every month that you delay, you're just putting off a lot of money.
And the counter side of that, the flip side of that is that, a couple of big months of contribution can buy you a lot of time later on in life. Yeah. And so if you hit it hard the next couple of years, you may be able to retire earlier than you thought. If we do things the right way. So that's a huge, huge thing.
So you've talked about doing it, putting money back. Do you have suggestions? Should people be wary of some type of investment, or should they stay in? Tell me your thoughts on that.
So this is a great question. Okay, great. We've got $750. Where is it invested? Yeah. Because that is a whole different piece of the pie. Is it just in a target date fund, which is going to be at that age mostly probably bonds, or is it in a diversified stock portfolio? The truth is that asset allocation largely determines returns. Sure. It's not always, but that's 85% of the way there. And there's some tweaks that can be made to potentially increase that, but we want to do that thoughtfully. And so one of the mistakes I see people make, there's two with this conversation. One is they're too conservative, or they take too much risk. And some ways that people take too much risk is by having too much of a percentage of bonds in their portfolio. They don't realize that. The goal of your retirement assets is to beat inflation. And so what's the best plan to beat inflation? Well, depends on what your risk tolerance is. But what we find is people feel like they're behind and they take too much risk, and then something happens and they've got to wait a couple extra years, or their assets don't grow as much as they need to. And then in that situation, we need to work a little bit more. And so we need to know, what your risk tolerance is, what your risk capacity is, and balance the portfolio to get that right. There's no one size fits all. It's not everyone should be in your age, minus 100 in bonds. No, we've got to figure out, what you really need to spend and what is the least amount of risk we can take in order to get there. Yeah. So it's just unfortunately not as simple as, just buy, Tesla or Walmart or something. That's not
sure.
That simple.
Well, I think sometimes people get to this age and they start thinking growth means up and down and up and down. Well, yeah, but you're still not quite there yet, and you can recover during a down in anticipation that if there's going to be downs, there's going to be ups. And we really need those ups at this age before we start pulling from it.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And, as long as you have a great portfolio that's well designed, short-term volatility is your friend, especially if you're in your peak earning years, because you're adding money in, you're buying shares at a lower price. Where volatility hurts us is if we need to spend that money right away. Yeah. And, if we're talking about your retirement nest egg, that some of that money, most of that money, is not going to be spent for 25 or 30 years. So it's okay that it's volatile if we have a plan to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Where people get in trouble is they don't make a plan or they don't have a system to work through. Now, before we move on, these acceleration strategies could add hundreds of thousands to your retirement security. So click the link in the description to fill out the questionnaire. We'll send you a personalized video analyzing your specific situation and showing you how to optimize your path from $750K to retirement readiness.